Okay, so the land management guide for horse owners and small lot farmers. This particular guide itself, and we'll kind of talk more about the guide, it actually is a physical, actual guide. We have 500 of these copies that we're going to be handing out to a lot of people who live in the township of Langley. Plus, we also have an online version too. So depending on where you're living, we've had people from across Canada and the rest of British Columbia come to some of our webinars. So if you're not able to come and pick up a hard copy, I can email you if you request an e-version. So this particular guide that I had just shown you was created from the Code of Practice for Agricultural and Environmental Management. That particular government regulation is a BC one, and it was updated in 2019. So it's not a new regulation. It was updated. And what this guide also does is it actually has other government regulations in there too, because some of these regulations are anywhere from 8 pages long to 70. That's a whole lot of reading. So the Ministry of Environment is a separate branch of the BC government, but they of course work with the Ministry of Agriculture, and they have eyes on all of the work that BC Agriculture does. And again, on behalf of LEPS, we created that wonderful guide. So who is LEPS? So for people who are on our call or viewing later, you may be wondering, okay, who is this organization? So the Langley Environmental Partner Society. So obviously LEPS is that nice little cute acronym. We have been around for 30 years in the township and city of Langley. And essentially what our role is, or how we vision ourselves, is that we are protecting and restoring the natural environment through education, cooperation, and action. So our webinar today would be sitting underneath that education. So LEPS does many, many different methods of education to our local community, anywhere from going into elementary schools for in-person workshops with children, also hands-on work at our Langley Learning Farm with our high school students, and also through the general public as well via these webinars, or we even can sometimes have in-person education workshops. So we are a non-for-profit and non-government. And being an environmental organization, we kind of see ourselves to be the bridge between government and local residents. So again, being 30 years old, now we're heading into 31, as now we're in January. We were started in 1993. We are comprised of full-time and seasonal staff. So again, this is the winter. So now we just have our full-time staff that are employed, and core programs that we typically sort of funnel all of our education would be through watershed stewardship, agricultural stewardship, restoration, and education. So these are some photos that our seasonal staff kind of have done a lot of invasive control, teaching people about, garbage, recycling. And yeah, so we always think that education is power. The more we have, the more we can be proactive with our community. So this particular webinar series is part of a grant that we call the Community Collaborative Towards Water Quality Improvement. It's a big topic, but we kind of dive deeper a little bit from there. So on December of 2023, we received some funding from EcoAction, Climate Change Canada, to do outreach work in Langley to reduce pollution and bacterial contamination in freshwater ecosystems. So this is where I kind of bang the gong that the township of Langley is special. It has over 700 kilometers of fish-bearing streams. And through this, we really hope to increase citizens' awareness of rural land management practices. And how we can do that through this grant is site consultations. So we will be able to go out onto sites, these are all kind of confidential site visits. So we'll give you tips, on various things that maybe your property is very keen on. Like, let's say if you have a water course flowing through your property, you could be having, manure location placements. I'm just going to be turning down mute. Yes, we want to make sure we're nice and quiet here with our recording here. So yeah, so site consultations. So we'll give tips on that. And through those site consultations, we actually have some funding for some free plants. So depending on how your site is, if it's very specific and unique, we might be able to give you some plants to help with your soil stabilization. We are going to be doing some water quality testing. So this is we're undergoing 3 years of this sort of work, and most of the activities will be between the months of January to March. And yeah, we will be doing water quality testing. So we have a few different sites that we actually do visit, and we send all of that data to the lab. And we're also going to be focusing on a series of webinars. So this is kind of our first one for 2023. It's the most dense one, dealing with some government regulations. But, you know, this is an easy way to learn what those are. So then you're not having to, you know, go through days and days of reading a lot of government regulations. So when I said Langley Township is special, look at all those water courses. So anything that is blue, that is a creek. And this is obviously at the map of the township of Langley, and you can sort of look at that based on where you are. You can kind of figure out where you are on the map. Another thing too, when you have your municipal footprint that looks sort of like this, that means that a lot of our lands are small parceled out. So we look very different than, let's say, Surrey and Abbotsford. We have so much water flowing through that our land parcelization is quite different. So obviously, being in the township of Langley, we have a border, and that border is at Zero Avenue. So if anybody really kind of drives on Zero Avenue, we have another country that's just down to the south of us. And water is fluid. It does not stay put. So we have our neighbors to the south who also do water quality testing because they'd like to know what is flowing into their country. And we often do a lot of kind of, you know, like we do have meetings with them. They let us know how they feel and what their testing is, and their test results. And sometimes they are compared from what our labs are, what they say the testing is, because we have testing sites actually quite south as well. So we like to pick up kind of and monitor what we have going on down there, because it's all flowing south. So this is how special Langley is. We'll go to the next slide there, Sebastian. Okay, so here's a little chart. Now, I'm sorry that it's small, but I kind of had no choice there. A lot of these graphs are actually, well, they're always, I did blow it up as much as I can, but this was, depending on where you are and if you know some of the water courses flowing through the township, this particular sample here for E. coli was from the Little Campbell River. And we did it from, obviously, you can see here, November 2021 to March 2023. So that would be obviously past data. So this wouldn't be completely relevant about where we stand now. And that's why we do tests several times a year. So here we started testing again here in November of 2021, and then we did it in January of 2022, and then February, March, April, May, June, and then we didn't test at all in the summertime. And it can kind of tell you based on month, because it's all color coded, exactly how high the E. coli results were for that testing site. So Little Campbell River actually is south in Langley, and it flows right into Campbell Valley Park. And that is this CVRP. And all of a sudden, we tested again at 16th Avenue here, and that's in the US. So our US neighbors actually gave us that data. So here we have kind of like a bit of a red flag, what's going on down here by Campbell Valley, you know, Regional Park. That's kind of a way for us to sort of figure out where exactly some of our issues are, because these guys in the south, course, our little US neighbors, they question us if the E. coli results are quite high. And with all of the water quality sampling, we're just not testing for, we're testing for all animal, you know, fecal coliforms, like, because it's not just really what all of our farmers do. It actually can be anywhere between bird, roof bird. So crows, it can sometimes be human habit. So not knowing actually how to dispose of manure or know it, a good kind of best management practices on farms. That's why we do all of this education to see if we can somehow change some of these results. So that's just kind of how you would read one of these graphs. They are really public knowledge too, but again, sometimes even looking for your regulations can be tricky. Um, these ones are, you just have to do some Google searching to see kind of what the up-to-date results are. And on our website, you can search Atlas, like water quality atlas, and you can actually get an up-to-date, more thorough counts for E. coli and fecal coliforms on our website. So that's just a little hint there about what we look for and what we're testing, and some, a flash kind of thing about, what on earth happened in March in a certain sites. So we're going to go back to the guide here. This lovely document, the Agricultural Code of Practice for Agricultural and Environmental Management. This regulation is not just for the township of Langley, it is BC province-wide. It outlines ways of preventing contamination of waste that can be harmful not only to us humans, but all other mammals. So this whole document is about waste and how we manage waste. And also, the whole regulation was rewritten in 2019, just because it was sort of noted that sometimes regulations are very challenging to understand. And especially if you're creating regulations for an entire province, you need to have them very easy to read. So they're very fluid, and everybody is understanding. And maybe like, not everybody can read a sentence or a paragraph and they have this exact same takeaway. So these regulations were all rewritten, and to make it kind of easy to read. So that's kind of what it is. But they added a new different take when they upgraded it, and it was more about being risk-based and science-based. So that being said, there may be more protective measures now that would need to be taken in high-risk areas during high-risk conditions. So I'm going to go through what that is. And also, this regulation is really, really, really wanting you guys to test your soil. Who wouldn't want to know what their soil tests are? But especially if you are growing or raising animals, pretty important. But also here, it includes a setback chart. Yeah, setbacks. I know nobody likes setbacks, but when you're dealing with the township of Langley with all those water courses, unfortunately, setbacks are very important. Okay, so some setbacks. Okay, well, what on earth does it look like? So sorry, this is it's taken right out of the regulation, so it could be a little hard to read. I tried to make it as big as I could, but this is the best I could do. So how you would simply read this is, we have a few document columns here. So we have the drinking water source, and then we have a water course, and then a property boundary. So if a permanent storage structure on ground or under pen storage, this would be manure. So we have 30 meters from a drinking water source. That would indeed be a well. Now, the water course is 15 meters. So it kind of gives you sort of guides, especially if you're doing any sort of development on your property, if you are in regards to having a water course, that just kind of mostly safely says what the average regulation is. Because, if we have, let's say, I'll go to the November of 2021, where we had all of that flooding, Abbotsford potential, specifically in Chilliwack was hit the hardest just due to the landscape. Township, we had a few areas that were flooded, and in those areas, those poor people actually had their wells were contaminated just due to the flooding, and especially they had animals. So all of this stuff does go somewhere. Okay, so we're going to go define these high-risk areas as defined by the AEM code. So a high-risk area means either a high precipitation area, a vulnerable aquifer recharge area, and a phosphorus affected area. So phosphorus in water is green foam, and it looks like algae. It's not very pretty. Phosphorus affected areas, if you have it in your water course, you will kill the ecosystem living in there, especially if there's fish. So a high risk condition will be anything with strong divergent windy conditions, storm events, or periods of short-term intense or high rainfall, seasonal high water tables or flooding, and the degree to which is used for an agricultural operation slopes toward a watercourse, and if sufficient to cause contaminated runoff. So we're thinking of a couple of different things, especially, if we realize that climate change actually is here, or the result of the science behind climate change. We are dealing with these very specific weather historical events. So when we say it's more science-based and more kind of like preventative measures, they've sort of written in the high risk areas and how it's defined. To sort of validate some of the other points in here. So there are no, these are just best management practices that, especially if you do have wells and you have neighbors. Go to the next slide, please. So this updated regulation, what else does it include? Well, there's a few more things. So obviously it's ensuring our water courses and groundwater are protected through proper storage and use of manure and other nutrient sources and other materials such as wood residue, prevent water quality impacts from contaminated runoff, prohibit direct discharges into water courses, require nutrient management planning, allow for increased monitoring in high-risk areas, provide clear compliance expectations for agricultural operator for setbacks, storage and nutrient applications, and requires record keeping. So that the whole topic of record keeping is another updated nuance to the updated AEM code from 2019. So with food security and all those the food recalls, usually let's say lettuce, will have a note out there that this lettuce has certain traces of E. coli on it and it's a food recall. Record keeping with manure application and distribution is very important, because if you are, let's say, trucking your manure somewhere or people are picking it up from you, and how they use it, that's why soil testing is very important. This is how, when it's written down and recorded, we can sort of track exactly where it all came from. And it's just one of those things. So record keeping, nobody wants to do it, but we made it very easy with our guide. So I call it this all-in-one resource. So not only does it have the AEM code regulations in it, we actually wrote this particular, well, I'll call it an informative document. So it's easy to read. So it's a very conversational read. It's very clear. And we actually include other regulations. So then you have like the best of both worlds. So we have the BC Weed Control Act, Water Sustainability Act, and we actually went in and we, this is not in any of the regulations. When we say there's a nod to your local health authority, I had to do a whole lot of digging to find out exactly how often you need to test your well. And the owners of that information is actually your local health authority. And in our case, it's Fraser Health. And just so you know, their recommendation is once a year, just due to the significant weather events. It's recommended twice a year, especially if you are in a high risk area. But that's just for your own health. You don't want it contaminated well. So the land management guide, just more of an overview here is it offers tips on manure storage and models for best practices. So throughout the guide, we actually have a few different kind of manure setups on how to, make sure that it's all taken care of. And just so you know, all manure piles should be covered, whether it is with roof or a tarp. And with that being said, tarps, because you have signed up for one of our evening webinar today, you guys all get a free tarp. And that's just to make sure that we are using them and to making sure we're not having any leaching. So we also go through and explain how to manage weeds without chemical use. We also include, so for those people who are around the province of BC, knowing that you're not, within the township of Langley with all of our special mapping, we also include local BC regional concerns. So whether it's the Kootenays, whether it's the Okanagan, we actually have regional concerns in there that covers weather, temperatures, and water management suggestions. And in the guide, because this whole manure, record keeping, we actually created some templates, to which you can actually just simply photocopy, and then you know what would be kind of expected. More or less, if you're distributing manure, it's a bit less information you need to write down. It's mostly the manure application. It also helps explain the why of the regulations and how it impacts our health. And again, I've mentioned this before, but it actually saves time so that you don't have to read all of these other regulations. Mostly, for managing waste on farms, there's about 7 of them that, kind of overlap with each other. That's just why the guide was created. The other ones that BC has may not fall within, the waste category. Okay, so, we're asking like, okay, so why setbacks? So when we say that things are, it's explaining why in a nutshell. This is why we have setbacks. I've every single farmer I have met. So a farmer, if you go to the dictionary kind of description, is anybody who is using their land to grow or raise something. So that would be anywhere even between breeding, not just, vegetable and fruit farming, or even, raising meat birds or other animals. So why we have setbacks specifically, because nobody likes to lose land, especially if they are farming. The thing is the setbacks mostly have to do with a lot of your neighbor relations. So first off, keep the creeks and streams healthy, keep our neighbors to the south happy, because we did have a little bit of a problem with our water flowing in, and it actually has really damaged the state of the shellfish industry in Boundary Bay in the state of Washington. Again, why setbacks? So severe environmental disasters, flooding, well contamination. These are something that really does not only affect, our water courses, but it also can affect human health. And, when you're made up of very small, medium-sized parcels in the township of Langley, the friendly neighbor thing is very important. So I met a farmer recently, his 4.5-acre farm, he has 11 neighbors that share a boundary, like boundary lines with him. So it is, making sure that you are kind of maintaining, a certain distance from a property boundary. And that's just really good overall friendly neighbor relation. Okay, so I covered mostly waste and kind of giving you a bit of an overview. So this is, again, more provincial. I would really recommend too that you kind of dive a little bit into some local municipal bylaws. Now, I actually really like what the Ministry of Agriculture has done. That this particular AEM code is actually reviewed on a consistent basis. And when you look at it online, they actually say when they actually have updated it, even with some grammatical changes, anything like that. So they will review these regulations and update it, on, every 2 weeks or so. But local municipal bylaws can sometimes not be touched for 20, 30 years. And so, and obviously local municipal bylaws could be overlapping or slightly different. So in the township of Langley, we have a soil deposits bylaw, which would include any sort of matter going on to property. So this is about the provincial code, but I would just make it very, I would suggest looking at municipal bylaws to see what exactly are they covering that this guide isn't, because the township themselves want their creeks and streams very clean as well. So the 2 takeaways from today, if all of this other information does not apply to you, because I know that receiving some of the RSVPs for tonight's webinar, we have a lot of very different people. So some of you are property owners, some of you are not, some of you have horses, some of you don't. So I just wanted to make sure that you had, at least you knew that there were resources out there for you. But 2 takeaways really is try to test your soil. This would go for any new landowner coming into the township of Langley or those who apply manure yearly, especially if you're not really proficient on how you're applying it, and because you could have different concentrations of of nutrients on different areas. So that's why we want to test your soil. There is a soil testing lab within the city of Langley called Exova or Element. They sometimes go back and forth what they're going to call, but they can test water and they can also test soil. And just try to avoid runoff of any kind. So in the past, we've kind of encouraged people to put gutters on their barns, and also just, proper water collection. Just make sure that if you're collecting rainwater for any sources, it's not located, close to manure storage. But we just don't want to be harming our health and also our fish. So those are my two takeaways. If you wanted to take away anything from today, going through all the regulations, these would be my two top ones, and they're probably your safest ones. So yeah, I wanted to do pretty much about a 45-minute session today. So I have 30 minutes for the presentation, and I'm going to unmute you guys and you can ask questions. But if you feel you have some specific questions more than what this particular webinar kind of hit on, please send me an email, just even to the same one that you had RSVP'd to. If you are interested in knowing more about the Langley Farmers Institute, the email is on your screen right there. That institute obviously is also a kind of a provincial sort of body, and our mandate as the Farmers Institute is supposed to be there for farmers, be not only a resource but an advocate. And with that being said, we deal mostly with municipal and provincial regulations as well. So I did mention that we were recording this particular video and putting it on our YouTube channel. So that is our handle on YouTube. We did a series of webinars last year, which might be of particular interest to you too. And you can obviously just kind of put on in your YouTube search engine there, just at LEPS Langley. And yeah, so I'm going to stop our recording here and then I will answer questions.